So this is going to be a harder video to make than the usual technical tutorials that we put out. I'm going to try to talk about what art means, for me at least, and also talk about AI image generators. So I hope I get this right. So the way that I see art is that, we come into this world, we're born, and we start to have visual experiences, right? We start to be able to take in different shapes, most of us, right? And we can respond to those in different ways. Some are appealing, some are terrifying, and we start to see things that are moving or interesting, like a breathtaking scene, for example. I used to really love to look across rooftops, like from a high up, like a top floor window, especially at like golden hour, just as the sun goes down and the sun's coming in at an angle. The light gets split up into different colors. It's like the light is painted across the sky. And it would really mean something to me, a kind of visual experience, a visual feeling that I couldn't put into words what it meant, but I knew I was having that experience. And then I'd see artwork, like maybe the background paintings in a Ghibli movie like Totoro or something, or maybe a John Singer Sargent watercolor, all kinds of artwork, and I'd realize that it was kind of speaking to me in the same way. It was giving me that same kind of visual experience that I found very meaningful. And I think for some of us, the visual experience in life, it's not just, it's especially important, right? It's almost to a spiritual level that we really care about that and want to get closer to it. Now, what is really, really cool is that we are all having a different set of visual experiences as we go through life, right? We're seeing different things. And then also because we're different, we're reacting to those in different ways. We're finding different things appealing, right? We're experiencing them differently. And what's really cool, again, is that there's a way that, even though I don't think we can really describe these experiences in words, there's a way that we can share, like, this is how I'm experiencing it, and then I can see how other people are experiencing it, and that is visual art, right? So I can try and put down and express on paper what I found interesting, what's appealing to me, and that kind of thing. And it's not just what I'm seeing and what other people are seeing in the observable world, but also from our imaginations, right? So there's also a lot of visually interesting ideas that we can conjure up from our brains, and I want to see what people conjure up as well, and we can do that through art, which is really, really cool. There's a big challenge though, which is the way that I would describe it is like dirty panes of glass, right? So there's this whole visual experience that I'm having and I want to express it, but between me, that's inside of me, and then there's the paper which is outside of me, and between the two there's these dirty panes of glass, which basically, as I try to express it, it gets distorted and messed up. And when I'm building skills, when I'm practicing and building skills, the way I think of that is it's like we're cleaning the glass, right? And so what we can get out onto the paper is a clearer representation of our visual experience. And so as you keep doing your exercises and building your skills, you're going to be able to more clearly express the thing that you experienced, that you found interesting. And that's why I think it's a shame when people just focus on the skill but then forget about the point of it, which was to see what your personal expression from it. It's also why I think that when people say just working on skill will reduce how expressive you are, I don't think that at all. I really think the opposite. And so we're all at different stages of of cleaning the glass, and I really just love to see people going through that process, trying to continually express themselves at any level of skill. And that is the world of art. We can share with each other and work on our skills together. Then there's two extra things which make this whole thing even better. So one thing is that as you clean that glass, it's two-way, right? And so what happens is that as you get more skilled, as you work on your skills, what you find interesting and what you find appealing evolves, right? So before I studied it, I didn't understand how light worked, and so I didn't really see some of the amazing things, like just on a sunny day with a blue sky, how the shadows are lit by sort of cooler, bluer light from the sky, and the sunlit areas are warmed up by the warmer sunlight. And so seeing how the warms and cools play off against each other, this is something that I couldn't pick up on before I started practicing the art skills. And so what I appreciate about the world and what I find visually beautiful has evolved and changed dramatically as I keep cleaning that glass. So the skills help to express what I'm interested in, and the skills also help what I'm interested in to evolve. And it's the same with everybody else. Now, another thing that's a little bit more down to earth and practical that I think is really cool is that a lot of people, these days at least, are able to make a living from that whole journey, from that process. Because there are lots of industries like games, for example, or animation and things like that, which require people to use those skills. And so people can dedicate a lot of time, dedicate their whole life to that journey. And of course, there's all sorts of different types of art, but having so many different types of jobs relating to those skills means that we have more people exploring these things and sharing. Like, a lot of the best resources for learning a lot of these skills come from people who had, or have careers in in concept art, for example, in games and things like that, right? And so this brings me to the topic of AI image generators. Now, the first thing that I would say about these is that it's my natural inclination to want to embrace new things like this, like new technology. And it's certainly not my natural inclination to be like trying to stifle it and get rid of it and stuff like that. I'm like, I'm curious. And a lot of artists are like that. They're curious and interested. And if there's something that's going to provide scope for more of that process, that beautiful process I talked about, a lot of artists are quite interested in that, right? If it's gonna help them. And the promise of AI as some sort of tool to help with that is interesting, right? And so what I'm going to be saying here is not some sort of just knee-jerk anti-AI reaction. My initial reaction was to be interested. So obviously what I've described there is quite different to what the process of image generation from these text-to-image generators and how they operate, right? So there's a lot of discussion points around AI art, but obviously there are different types of AI and different ways of doing AI, and then there are different tools that AI could use AI, right? So for example, I could imagine someone trying to make an animation, and maybe they could train an AI on their own work. They could do the keyframes or whatever, and the AI could help with those in-betweens. And then it could just sort of help them become like a more powerful creator. They're able to do more with their own work, right? And so there are different ways to develop AI tools, and then there are different ways to use AI tools. But what I want to talk about is one of the main ways that AI is being used in the realm of art, which is the text-to-image generators, specifically the ones that are trained on these massive data sets, right, that have scraped up all kinds of images off the internet. So these are a specific type of model in terms of how they're being used, and also a specific type of model in terms of what they do. So in terms of what they do, they're designed not as a tool to help creative people and artists to create. They are designed to replace artists, right? When the sort of people that have developed these tools are talking to artists, they'll often talk about them as a way of helping, or a tool that's kind of useful to an artist. But when they are promoting them more broadly, they're generally promoted as replacement tools. And then when you think about the way that they're designed, right, the way that it works as a replacement tool, right? Which is, there's a lot of debate and discussion to be had around that, right? If it was purely a tool that just helps people create more, that's one thing. But once you get into the replacement issue, then it's a little bit more contentious, and there's lots of debate to be had about that, right? But it's still quite debatable, right? And I can see arguments for how it's maybe challenging, but overall it could still be beneficial and push creativity and artwork forward, right? The part which I think is way more cut and dry negative, the part that is way more clearly something that basically shouldn't be allowed and is clearly sort of unethical, is the training data sets. And so in terms of like the art community wanting to interact and deal with this issue, I think that is the first thing that needs to be sorted out, and we can kind of laser focus on that. And so this is kind of how I see this. And maybe, if you see it differently, let me know in the comments. But we have a situation where lots and lots of different artists get little bits of money. There's a broad market. It's not like any individual is making mega bucks, but lots and lots of artists are supported to create artwork for different commercial purposes. And that supports them to be artists. And then some companies have come along to create this replacement, which kind of intercepts and siphons off some of that money. And maybe there'll be new creation, right? Additional creation that wouldn't have been there before, but there's also this siphoning off happening as well, right? And like I said, I think that is debatable about, we can have a big debate about that and the implications of that. But the part that makes it completely unethical is the fact that this tool that is being used to siphon off some of that income is made from the artwork of the artists that are being damaged by this, right? And so there's no real argument for why that should have been allowed. I know people do make arguments, and I'll try and address some of those. So the first one is that, hey, all they did was train the model with those images. So that's just like how human artists study other people's artwork, like you've seen me do in this video. Study other people's artwork, and it's just learning in the same way that a human learns. So if you did these studies, I do these studies all the time, I recommend you do them too, then it's very hypocritical to say that AI models are not allowed to do that, or AI developers are not allowed to do that, right? Now, to me, this argument makes very, very little sense. So it's basically the equivalent of equating a trawler fishing boat that scrapes up the bottom of the ocean floor and destroys the ecosystem that created the fish in the first place, with a bird who dives down every now and then and picks out an individual fish and is actually part of that ecosystem, right? You could just say, well, they're both fish. They're both fishing, so it's the same. So it's hypocritical to say the trawler boat should be regulated, but the bird is just allowed to do it, right? It's like, no, of course it's different. Why? Because of the scale and the damage, right? The trawler ship scale, the amount it's taking up and the damage that it's doing as it goes means that should be regulated so that it doesn't screw up the whole thing too much. And then the bird doesn't need to be regulated because that is a normal, healthy part of the ecosystem, and it's a completely different situation. Like, surely that's clear. So what I mean is, you've seen me do these studies, and what I'm doing is, I'm studying these artists, and I'm going to take what I need for my own artistic expression by doing these studies. And what the AI companies, these specific ones, have done is scrape up the internet of millions of images, so many that they can't even look through all of them themselves, at an industrial scale, millions of them, and crunch them all up with some crazy maths that admittedly I don't understand, right? crunch them all up at an industrial scale to make a machine that can spit out images at an industrial scale based on that, right? And so that is damaging to artists because artists will and already are losing work to these AI generators, but also because a lot of them do not want their artwork to be in there and find it quite a violation that people are just like saying, I want this picture in the style of Greg Rakowski or whatever, or whoever, and then the thing just spits out something that looks like what that artist, what their style is, even though that style is so personal to them. Like I described earlier in the video, it's a huge part of their life and who they are, and they don't want it to be in there. But also, yeah, just the livelihood aspect, it affects them in those two ways. So the scale and the damage is wildly different. And so no, it's not the same as how human artists learn. And then there's a third argument, which is maybe more debatable, but it's like, hey, it's not human. And the human artists learning have their human experience that they're filtering the whole thing through, and the AI doesn't. So whether you think that matters, I think it does. Whether you think it does is up for debate, but I don't think the scale question or the damage question is. I think that if you like AI or you're excited about the prospects of AI, you would actually want the training data sets to be collected in a more ethical manner for a number of reasons. Number one, if you like AI image generators, it's because you like cool artwork and cool images. And the way that we got there was through the art community, through human artists, right? And so surely you'd want to keep them on board with this project because they're a big part of the project. Currently, against their will for many of them, but they're a big part of the project. So isn't it useful to keep them on board with what you're doing? Secondly, the reason that we have like copyright law and things like that, like I'd love to be able to just play any kind of music that I want in here, but I can't. And that is a good thing because it means that people are more likely to create and be able to make a living from what they create, right? It protects and encourages human creativity and ingenuity. Without that in place, if as soon as something is created, it can get crunched up and fed into these machines, there is less likely to be that spark of human innovation, right? And so if you care about cool looking artwork, then you should care about this. And there probably are ways forward as the technology progresses that it can be done in a way that keeps the art community on board, and surely that would be a good thing. So another argument for why we shouldn't be doing anything about this, or we should just allow this to happen, is it's been done. It's too late. The toothpaste is out of the tube and you can't get toothpaste back in the tube, right? So I'm pretty sure that I could get toothpaste back in a tube. I'd snip it open with some scissors, scoop it up, put it in and tape the tube back. Like there's a way to do it and it wouldn't all be back in and it'd be a bit messy. And so now that these models are out there, it's like, oh, it's too late. Well, no, because if it becomes, illegal to use these because they're based on stolen copyright infringing material, there's lots of copyright infringement that's against the law already. There's pirated movies, but it operates, outside of the law, and that means that it's kept under control. And so people still make movies and they can still, make a living from making movies, even though piracy exists because it is regulated, right? And that regulation is enforced. So if the use of these models when they have used an unethically gathered data set becomes illegal, then it's really going to help to, it's going to help alleviate all of these issues for sure. And that is still possible to do. Another sort of argument is, if you're just trying to stifle technology and you're anti-technology, I actually think that the regulation of technology is one part of embracing technology, you know? So basically, a lot of the arguments that I see are like, oh, you probably want to like still be riding a horse, you know? No, so when cars came out, people didn't go, oh, well, cars are made and we can't do anything about it, right? You go, okay, this is really good. Let's maximize the benefit and reduce the downside. So let's have things like, I don't know, traffic lights and stuff like that to stop the crashes. Let's not allow them to drive on the pavement where people walk. Let's not let them drive through playgrounds. Let's have some regulations, maximize the upside and reduce the damage. And that doesn't happen as soon as the cars come out or as soon as someone thinks of cars, right? The technology comes out, the laws and the systems and the processes then need to be figured out to manage that new technology. And that is going to be a slower process, but you need that process in order to properly embrace that technology and make it work. So instead of just having this big war and fight over this technology with some people hating it and some people loving it or whatever, what if we could regulate it so that everyone can get on board with it? That just makes a lot of sense, even if you're pro AI art. It's hard to know what we can do about this, but fortunately some artists are taking the lead. And there are some fundraisers that I'll link below, and I decided to donate to those, but I don't know the people involved. I just judged it based on what I read on the fundraising page. So, you know, I would suggest that you kind of do your own research to see if you want to support it too, if this is something that you care about. And the last thing that I'll say is I put out a video mid last year. It was more optimistic, more open, about these image generators. I think I got a few things wrong, so I took that down and I'm making this one now. This is really fast changing and there's new information that comes out. I didn't realize about these training data sets and stuff like that before. And so this video may well end up being wrong. I'm trying to stay flexible in my thinking about this because, you know, there's a lot of unknowns and it's changing all the time. So I'm trying not to get too tribal or sort of stubborn and stuck in my ways about it. This is my assessment of the situation right now, but it may well be wrong and it may well change. So anyway, if you want an actual tutorial about how to learn to draw, there should be one from us on the screen. Otherwise, thank you for sticking with me through this video.